Good morning, everybody. Welcome to all of you on what might seem like a strange day because there's this bright thing in the sky that we haven't seen for a while. So for those of you who brought the sun, or maybe it's the luck of the Irish that brought a little sun with us this morning, I thank you. My name is Mary Grant, and I'm the president of the Kennedy Institute for the United States Senate, and it is a great pleasure to welcome all of you here this morning for what will be an enlightening and enriching conversation. We are delighted and honored this morning to be joined by the ambassador from Ireland to the United States, Daniel Mulhall. We are just thrilled that he is with us. He's got a very busy tour throughout the United States, and for you to be with us this morning, Ambassador, is truly an honor indeed. To date, the Institute has hosted a number of programs in partnership with the Irish Consulate of Boston, and I'm very proud of that relationship and all we've accomplished together. As Ireland marks more than a century of independence, we are delighted to have this conversation with the ambassador on a wide range of current affairs in Ireland and the United States. From the Brexit deal to trade agreements and the United States' own interesting political climate. It is safe to say that we are in some challenging times, so I expect that we will have a lively and fun conversation this morning. The Institute takes pride in hosting lively and fun conversations that bring a diversity of perspectives and viewpoints into the room. We are particularly fortunate to consider among our partners the Irish Consulate in Boston. They have worked closely with the Kennedy Institute. As many of you know, Senator Kennedy, who was our founder of the Institute along with his wife, Vicky Kennedy, were steadfast supporters of Ireland, passionate about their Irish heritage and roots, very proud of their ancestors from Dugganstown and County Wexford, and the senator carried that with him proudly and deeply and richly. As a matter of fact, 55 years ago this month, a very young Senator Kennedy joined a crowd in Limerick where he had the opportunity to address thousands of people who turned out, and the senator described that experience as being emotional and filled him with joys and tears about his passionate relationship with Ireland. And roughly 2 decades after that experience, the senator was involved in organizing congressional colleagues to establish the bipartisan Friends of Ireland organization to help promote peace, talks in the region, strengthen the commitment to closer relations, and foster civil dialogues around common goals. Here at the Institute, we strive to do that as well through our education programs, through programs like this, through the work that we do in civic engagement. We invite all of you to come back to be part of what we are doing. We're happy this morning to join us at the program Ann Mostue, who's going to be moderating today's conversation. Ann is an anchor and reporter for Bloomberg Radio and Television in Boston, where she serves as co-host for Bloomberg's Baystate Business Hour programming. Ann has been an on-air reporter and producer for WGBH and has reported for NPR's All Things Considered, Marketplace, Weekend and Morning Editions, and the BBC, and we're delighted to have Ann with us this morning as well. Ann, thank you for being with us. Throughout the conversation, I invite all of you to help push it out, getting to the point on our Twitter feed, so you can you're all dubbed social media experts this morning, so help us with that. And at this point, though, I would like to take a moment to recognize and invite Consul General Fionnuala Quinlan to join me in a moment. Fionnuala was appointed Consul General in 2015, and she has brought great energy and passion to deepening the people-to-people, business, cultural, and political ties which have bound Ireland and New England for centuries, engaging with the vibrant Irish American communities across New England. Prior to her appointment here in Boston, she was Director of Press Relations at the Department of Foreign Affairs and Trade in Dublin, and before joining the department, Fionnuala worked as a journalist and editor in Ireland for more than a decade. She's also worked in Australia for the Daily Telegraph and was a frequent contributor to Radio France International during her experience in France. Over the years, the partnership between the Kennedy Institute and the Consul has been deep and rich, and Fionnuala has been instrumental in that. And we are both proud and saddened at her next appointment, which is an incredible honor and a recognition of all of her accomplishments. In June, Fionnuala will be serving as Ireland's ambassador to Kenya. We wish you great success, Fionnuala, in your new appointment. What an honor. And we know that the partnership with your great team at the Consul will remain strong. We are delighted to have you with us, Fionnuala. Please join me at the podium so we can kick off the program. Thank you, Fionnuala.
Thank you so much, Dr. Grant, for that very warm introduction. Ambassador, distinguished guests, it's a great pleasure to be with you this morning at the Edward M. Kennedy Institute. As Dr. Grant said, we've really enjoyed a very deep and rich relationship with the Institute, which I think is fitting, of course, given the deep involvement and the strong, very strong ties that Ireland has had with Senator Kennedy over many years. My job here this morning is really quite an easy one. It's to introduce a man who really needs very little introduction in this neck of the woods. Ambassador Dan Mulhall has been a very regular visitor to Boston and New England since he was appointed Ireland's 18th ambassador to the United States in August of 2017. As an avid student of history, he really needs very little encouragement to come to this great city on a hill, the birthplace of the Revolution. But of course, Boston is also the beating heart of Irish America, and Ambassador Mulhall has taken a very open approach to his role, engaging regularly and deeply with the Irish community here and across the United States. And of course, many of you will know when he's not with us in person, he is tweeting, blogging, podcasting about Irish-US relations, about culture, poetry, history, and so much more, so you can definitely keep in touch with him through any of those mediums. Ambassador Mulhall is from Waterford, but he made the excellent choice to go to Cork, my hometown, for his studies. He completed his undergraduate and his postgrad in UCC, specialising in modern history. In 1978, he joined the Department of Foreign Affairs and Trade, and over the intervening 4 decades has served in many of the most prestigious and influential roles in our Foreign Service. Excuse me. Following his early diplomatic assignments in Delhi, Vienna, and Brussels, where he worked on EU issues, he was appointed Ireland's first Consul General to Edinburgh. He served as Ireland's ambassador to Malaysia between 2001 and 2005, where he was also accredited to Thailand, Vietnam, and Laos. As ambassador at the time of the devastating Asian tsunami in 2004, he played a critical role in supporting Irish citizens who were caught up in the disaster. This important work was recognised in 2005 when Ambassador Mulhall was conferred with an honorary fellowship by the Royal College of Physicians of Ireland. From 2009 to 2013, he was Ireland's ambassador to Germany, right at the height of Ireland's economic crisis. And he made full use of his impressive range of communication skills to ensure that the German authorities and German people understood Ireland's stories and the sacrifices we had to make as a nation in order for us to exit the bailout as quickly as possible. Before coming to Washington, he served as Ireland's ambassador in London between 2013 and 2017, which, as we'll hear today, of course, was a critical period, not least due to the Brexit referendum. But during his time in Britain, he spoke regularly at Oxford, Cambridge, Edinburgh, London, the London School of Economics, again ensuring that Ireland's full range of interests and values were understood. And before departing for Washington, he was made a Freedom of the City of London in recognition of his work as ambassador. During his diplomatic career, he also held a number of positions in Dublin at our headquarters, including as Director General for European Affairs. He worked on the Forum for Peace and Reconciliation in the mid-90s, which was set up to promote political dialogue between both traditions on the island of Ireland. And he was also a part of the government's delegation at the time of the Good Friday Agreement. And as though all of that didn't keep him busy enough, the ambassador has also published a number of books. He's the author of A New Day Dawning, A Portrait of Ireland in 1900, and co-editor of The Shaping of Modern Ireland, a Centenary Assessment. And I know he's working on a book about James Joyce at the moment that I think will be published in a year or so. Ambassador Mulhall is married to Greta, also a diplomat, and those of you who have met them will know that they make an absolutely formidable team. So without further ado, it's my great pleasure to invite Ambassador Dan Mulhall to come to the podium along with Anne Mostue for what I know is going to be a very engaging discussion. Thank you so much, ladies and gentlemen.
Thank you so much, President Grant and Fionnuala, for the warm introduction. Thank you all so much for coming. We will be speaking for about half an hour, and then we will have a Q&A portion. But I thought I'd ask those of you in the audience, how many have been to Ireland? Oh, wow. And how many are of Irish heritage? Wow. Well, regardless, welcome. Thank you all so much for coming. It's such a treat to be interviewing the ambassador because he's such a great talker, as we say in the broadcast world, on a range of subjects. And I'm hoping we get to poetry.
Okay.
But we'll start with a few. We'll start with a few other things.
Sure.
Ambassador, the Kennedy family has had a long history and relationship with Ireland, but so has the United States. Would you talk a little bit about the current state of relations between the U.S. and Ireland?
Well, first of all, it is a particular privilege to be here at the Institute connected with Senator Edward Kennedy because of the role that he played in helping to bring peace to Ireland. I had that highlighted for me recently when I attended a screening in a number of places, in fact, in Springfield, Massachusetts last year and in Hartford, Connecticut this year, of a documentary film about John Hume, the great Irish peacemaker. And the key point made in that documentary was that way back in the early 70s, the start of the troubles or the conflict in Northern Ireland, John Hume, who was already a well-known, but still not even elected, but nonetheless he was a well-known figure in the Northern Ireland political scene, an emerging figure, relatively young man at the time, got a phone call from Senator Edward Kennedy, who was in Bonn for some security meeting, and he invited John Hume to come and meet him in Bonn. And John Hume, remarkably, had to go to the local credit union, which is a kind of an informal private bank that sort of maybe gives money to people who wouldn't be able to get money from a normal bank, because it's one of these sort of local credit unions that provides credit for people for small outgoings. And he borrowed money in order to travel to Bonn to meet Senator Kennedy. And that gave rise to a relationship that lasted for the rest of Senator Kennedy's life. And Senator Kennedy believed in John Hume. He accepted John Hume's analysis of the situation in Northern Ireland, and he then became part of an effort on the part of people in Congress to contribute to the situation in Northern Ireland, because what he wanted to do was to move away from the notion that the only support that Irish Americans could give to Ireland was in terms of supporting the armed struggle that was going on at the time, or the violence that was going on. And Senator Kennedy wanted to find a way in which Irish America could contribute in a more constructive and democratic way. In a constructive and fully democratic way. So that started this whole engagement by Irish America in the bringing of peace to Ireland, which culminated with the Good Friday Agreement, but continues to this very day, because 3 weeks ago I was in Dublin accompanying Speaker Nancy Pelosi.
I was just going to ask you about that.
She led a delegation composed of 8 members of Congress, plus herself. 6 of those 8 members of Congress have Irish backgrounds and are Irish Americans. So it shows that connection with Ireland endures. So just to come back to your question, the relationship has changed dramatically over the years. It started with the export of people from Ireland to the United States, particularly in the 19th century after the Great Famine. It developed in the 20th century with strong support for Irish independence that came from Irish Americans. There are many who believe that the Irish independence movement would never have succeeded without support from Irish America, because Irish America was a factor in the calculations of the then British government that it was necessary to concede independence to Ireland, because otherwise Irish America would make life very difficult for the United Kingdom here in the United States. So, and then later on, a strong economic connection through the hundreds of American companies who have invested in Ireland and continue to do so. And then more recently, Irish companies coming and investing in the United States. So the relationship has gone through a number of phases, but always America has been a great source of support for Ireland. Political support originally, which continues to this day, as expressed through Speaker Pelosi's visit, but also economic support. And now it's become much more of a two-way relationship, which is what I think is important for the years and decades ahead, that it should be a two-way relationship from which both countries benefit.
Yes, and I'll ask you a bit about tourism in a moment, but we do have to talk about Brexit, obviously. And there are those of us who read about Brexit every day and continue to follow it. There are those of us who have tuned it out, right? So tell us sort of the current major issues and the Irish backstop right now.
Well, first of all, Ireland never wanted the UK to leave the European Union. We believe that Ireland and the UK benefited jointly from EU membership. Our relationship prospered as fellow members of the European Union. We discovered that we had a lot more in common with the British when it came to a range of issues to do with economic policy, trade, smart regulation. All these things are things that we share with the British. So on most of the issues on the European agenda, Ireland and the UK tend to be on the same wavelength. Also, good personal relations were built up during the 45 years of membership. I can remember going to meetings of the European Council wherever it might be, in Brussels or maybe somewhere in Rome or in Madrid or somewhere around Europe, you'd have a meeting of the European Prime Ministers, and always during those meetings, the British and Irish Prime Ministers would have a bilateral meeting to discuss Northern Ireland. So they were able to discuss Northern Ireland without the fanfare. If they had a summit meeting in Dublin or in London, big fanfare, big expectations, you have to sort of deliver something out of that. But if you meet in the corridors of a European meeting, it's a much lower key event. But a lot of good work was done. And I remember times when things were quite difficult in Northern Ireland and between the two governments, when being able to meet at the high level, behind closed doors, away from the fanfare of media expectation, was quite valuable from the point of view of both governments and helped the cause of peace. So Brexit was a shock to us, as it was to everyone else, I think. Obviously, we accept that the British people have decided, and it's up to the British government and the Parliament now to implement that decision of the people as they see fit, and there's still some way to go on that. We don't know how it's going to end up exactly. So we regret it, and we particularly regret it because it will end this partnership that has gone on for 45 years between the UK and Ireland within the European Union with our other European partners. We regret it because it's likely that Britain's exit from the EU will create complications for our trading relationship with the UK, which is very important to us and which will be damaging if our trade with the UK is diminished in any way. But most importantly, I guess, politically, we worry about the impact on Northern Ireland. And that's why we need to have the backstop. Now, the backstop, I know it sounds like something you might have in baseball, but I think there's a shortstop in baseball, isn't there? But this is a backstop. It's a bit different. But anyway, the backstop is actually an insurance policy, right? Nobody wants to have a border in Ireland, right? The Irish government doesn't want it.
Right.
The British government doesn't want it. No EU country wants it. The European Commission doesn't want it. Nobody in Northern Ireland wants it. So you might say, well, what's the problem then? Well, the problem is that if Britain leaves the European Union, as it plans to do, if it leaves the single market, if it leaves the customs union, at some point in the future, Northern Ireland and Ireland will be in different customs jurisdictions. And that will raise the issue of how do you manage a situation where you have a different customs regime in the two parts of Ireland. And remember, the border in Ireland doesn't have any physical basis. There's no Rio Grande. There is no mountain range between north and south. The border goes through houses, villages, open fields. It's simply not a border that you could in any way control. Even during the conflict in Northern Ireland, it was very difficult for the British Army with tens of thousands of troops to control that border. So nobody wants a border. The backstop is designed to ensure that if everything else fails, the backstop guarantees that there can never be a border on the island of Ireland. And that's why that backstop is so important. That's why it's part of the agreement that's there between the UK and the European Union. Unfortunately, that agreement hasn't yet been approved by the British Parliament, and we have to await developments there to see what happens. But from our point of view, we want to ensure that whatever happens, the damage to the Irish economy is minimised, and we will never have a border on the island of Ireland, because the border on the island of Ireland would be a risky venture, because it would further undermine the process that has led to peace and normalisation of life in Northern Ireland.
Ambassador, what would then be the trade implications of Brexit between the US and Ireland specifically, not England?
Well, of course, Brexit doesn't have any direct bearing on trading relationships between Ireland and the United States. I guess the main economic implication that would be relevant to the United States is that it is likely that in the event of Brexit, particularly if the UK were to leave without a deal for the future, to govern the future relationship between the UK and the EU, it's likely that some American companies would want to develop their presence in Ireland, because Ireland would be within the European Union, within the single market, and the UK wouldn't be. Now, I have to say that we have no interest in seeing the British economy undermined or damaged, because for us, Britain is our nearest neighbour, and the best thing for Ireland is if the British economy is doing well, that also benefits us. So we have no desire to see the British economy damaged at all. However, we do know that certain companies will look to Ireland to expand their presence in Ireland, because Britain will no longer give them guaranteed access to the European single market. So that's probably the main benefit. Also, I would say that for Irish investment in the United States, Brexit is likely to increase that.
Right.
And the reason I say that is because for Irish companies that are growing their businesses, they can't grow them too quickly in Ireland, because small population, 5 million people, there's a limit to what you can do in Ireland. So Irish companies, when they're growing their businesses, have to grow abroad. And traditionally, they would have chosen Britain as their destination of choice for their growth overseas. Perhaps from now on, they might find Britain a little less attractive, because there won't be the advantage of the single market membership for investments based in Britain. And that means that the United States will become a more attractive destination for Irish investment, because of it being an English-speaking country, and because the opportunities here are clearly enormous, given the size of the economy here, and given the fact that Irish companies feel comfortable operating in the United States. Same language, similar business culture, all these things are helpful to investment. That's why there's so much Irish investment in the UK, and that's why there's a growing quantity of Irish investment in the US.
Right. I was hoping you'd say that. That's good to hear. Well, let's specifically talk a little bit about tech and biotech, which we know here in Boston is thriving so much. Do you see that expanding? I mean, those companies so often have an Irish office in Dublin and then an office here in Boston or Cambridge.
Well, Boston Scientific, for example, is the second largest employer in Ireland, and they employ something like 7,000 or 8,000 people. So for us, that's a huge presence. And there are many other companies, Massachusetts companies that are in Ireland.
Shire, Pfizer.
Medtronic, Shire, and so forth. Yeah. So there's a lot of Massachusetts investment in Ireland, and we hope to see that continue to grow. The reason why US investment is so prevalent in Ireland is because, first of all, our presence within the European Union. There are 750 US companies currently investing in Ireland. Now, we know they're not in Ireland because they love us, because we're such nice people. obviously there is a sentiment, a positive sentiment towards Ireland, which doesn't do
Sure.
any harm. You know, a lot of these companies are led by people with Irish heritage, and that means that they will look at Ireland and say, well, okay, I want to have a look and see whether Ireland would be a place I could locate some of my European operations. But they won't go to Ireland purely for sentimental reasons. No business person does that, nor should any businessman do it, by the way. I wouldn't recommend it to anybody. So when they look at Ireland, they see, first of all, location within the European Union. Tick. Positive thing. They see English-speaking workforce. Tick. Positive. They see a well-educated population. About 50% of Irish people living in Ireland between 25 and 55 have university degrees. 60% of our school leavers now go on to some kind of third level, some kind of university or equivalent education, further education. Tick. Positive thing. They see a government that is, no matter what government is in power in Ireland, one thing doesn't change. They're very positive towards foreign direct investment. There's none of this kind of, we're ambivalent about it. Every government, whether it's whatever the complexion, whatever the composition, will be positive about investment. Tick. And then we have a corporate tax rate which we think is fair and transparent, 12.5% across the board, no exceptions. So put all those things together, and Ireland's a very attractive place for US investment, and I think will continue to be so. And Brexit probably adds some additional dimension of attractiveness to Ireland because of the fact that we will now be the only English-speaking country within the European Union.
Let's talk a little bit about tourism. How important is tourism to the Irish economy? I think those of us who've been there assume it's very important, but
well,
maybe not.
The most important part of our economy is the services sector. It's like everywhere now. I mean, all advanced economies, financial services are huge in Ireland. We have a big financial services sector in Dublin. State Street has I recently drove back in from the airport, past the Financial Services Centre. There's a big building there which says State Street, obviously a Boston company. So there are lots of international companies now based in our financial services centre in Dublin, and that centre is growing all the time. So there are 750, as I said, US companies employing 150,000 people all over our country and so forth. So tourism is important, but it's not overwhelmingly important. I mean, it's probably between 5 and 10% of GDP, which is significant, but it's not like, you know, industry and services overall would be much bigger and much more important. It's probably about the same level as agriculture, actually. But the important thing about tourism, of course, is that it has one thing that's important. It spreads the benefits around the country. Sure. One of the dangers with Brexit, I think, one of the risks for us with Brexit is that the gains in terms of extra investment in Ireland by US and other companies will all be in Dublin, Cork, Limerick, Galway, Waterford. In other words, in the cities where these companies will tend to look to operate.
Right.
The losses will be in the countryside. So the most vulnerable sector of our economy to Brexit would be our food producing sector, which of course is by definition rural and spread around the country. Because Irish, about 40% of Irish food exports go to the UK. So if, for example, there's a drop in the value of sterling because of Brexit, that's a big, big blow to producers of food in Ireland because the food they sell in Britain will become more expensive in Britain. If there are tariffs, that would be very damaging because those tariffs are highest in the area of food exports. So there's a lot to worry about. So the danger is that we lose things in rural Ireland and the gains are in the cities, which kind of, you don't want to see that happening because already the economy is probably too heavily concentrated in Dublin and the surrounding areas. The benefit of tourism is that it's found not in cities to a large extent, it's found all over the country. And so about 2 million Americans visited Ireland last year, which was a record number, and they are a very important part of our tourism industry. Already this year, the number is up 10% on last year. So there's a continuing enthusiasm being shown by American tourists for visiting Ireland. Think about this remarkable fact. Ireland has less than 1% of the population of Europe. 10% of all American tourists visit Ireland. So we are really a very big draw for American tourists going to Europe.
Absolutely. Well, combining that concept of trade and tourism, let's talk about students. There are obviously so many colleges and universities in this area, as you're aware, and you've been touring. Talk a little bit about the significance and what you see as the importance, having been a visitor of the U.S. on a student visa yourself. Yeah. Talk a little bit about the significance of these cross-cultural exchange programs.
I came here in 1974 to Kansas City. It was my first time ever on a plane. It was my first time out of Europe. Well, I'd been to Britain once before, so I'd had one foreign trip before I ventured into the unknown world of Kansas City. I'm going back there next week, actually, to retrace some of my steps, to make the point that J1 visas are valuable because they give people experience that comes in handy eventually after 40 years.
Right, tell everyone what you did.
Well, I actually worked in a hamburger place, and it's still going. So I must have done something good in that hamburger place, and I stayed at a small Jesuit college, Rockhurst College in Kansas City, and I was looked after by two wonderful Irish Americans, which gave me my first taste, by the way, of how wonderful Irish Americans are when it comes to their affection for Ireland. These were people we met in a very kind of indirect way through people we knew at home in my hometown of Waterford. But these two gentlemen looked after us brilliantly. I mean, couldn't have done more for us, and I'm hoping to visit both of their families, and they're both now deceased, sadly, but I'd like to visit their graves and pay my respect to them for the help they gave us. So in Kansas City, I went to my first baseball game, my first American football game, my first American barbecue, all these things. My first road trip, yes. So, and that stayed with me for really all those years in between. I'd always been thinking, wouldn't it be nice to come back and serve in the U.S. at some time? I thought my time had passed. I thought my opportunities had been. I thought I'd missed the opportunity. And then a couple of years ago, I was asked if I would want to come to the United States, and it took me about a millisecond to say yes, please.
Sure.
And I've regretted it not for a millisecond.
Well, and you became a diplomat. I mean, I imagine that sort of travel gave you the courage to continue to other places and then continue on your career path.
Probably. I hadn't thought of being a diplomat, to be honest with you. It was never something that I had a burning desire to be. I kind of stumbled into it by accident, and here I am 41 years later, still involved. Well, so never plan things too carefully, I think, is my recommendation to others.
Fair enough. You're writing this book about James Joyce. Talk a little bit about Irish literature and the role that it plays in diplomacy.
Well, again, I stumbled upon this. I was a literature major and a history major, and when I went to India, I got to know a few academics there, Indian academics, who were interested in William Butler Yeats and James Joyce. And one day, one of them said to me, "We're having a conference here in Delhi in a few months' time. Would you like to give a talk?" And I said, "Well, okay." I was a 24-year-old recent graduate with my master's in Irish history, literature. And I thought, well, okay. So I sat down and I wrote a paper about William Butler Yeats and the idea of a national literature for Ireland. And I went to this conference, and there were 1,500 people at the conference. And I realized, hey, we have something here that we own, which the rest of the world finds interesting. We shouldn't be shy about this. And ever since that time, I realized and recognized the value of our culture and our literature to Ireland, because it does set us apart.
Absolutely.
From other countries. Because we're English speaking, our literature is known all over the world. And I'll give you another example. On one occasion, when I was in Delhi, I was invited by the grandmother of a friend of mine, an Indian friend of mine whom I'd met, to her home for lunch. She was the sister of Jawaharlal Nehru, the first Indian Prime Minister. She herself had been ambassador to the UN, ambassador to Russia, ambassador to the UK and Ireland. Very distinguished lady. I walked into her home in one of the suburbs of New Delhi. We sat down at the table with all of her family around. And she said to me, "You're Irish?" And I said, "Yes." And she said, "I will arise and go now and go to Innisfree, and a small cabin build there of clay and wattles made. 9 bean rows will I have there, a hive for the honey bee, and live alone in the Bealoud glade. And I shall have some peace there, for peace comes dropping slow, dropping from the vales of the morning to where the cricket sings. There midnight's all a glimmer, and noon a purple glow, and evening full of linnets' wings. I will arise and go now, for always night and day I hear lake water lapping with low sounds by the shore, while I stand on the roadway or on the pavements grey. I hear it in the deep heart's core." Then she went on to recite When You Were Old and Grey and Full of Sleep. And I said, "Mrs. Pandit," that was her name, "where did you learn that poetry?" And she said, "Oh, I learned it when I was interned during our independence struggle." She said, "Yeats was an Irish nationalist, and I never forgot his poetry, and it was a great comfort to us." So I thought, look, that was a little epiphany for me. It was a little revelation. And I thought, if a woman from the most significant Indian family of the 20th century, which at that time had produced 2 prime ministers, had a third afterwards in Rajiv, if she could have a command of Irish literature, I should have one too. So that's why I decided to learn that poem by heart. And I've recited it all over the world ever since. And it always works well, I find. The other thing I remember is that when I was in Germany in 2009 to 2013, Ireland was in a very bad place because we had major economic difficulties. A lot of attitudes in Germany towards us were rather negative. You know, the feeling was that we had overdone the boom. We had enjoyed the boom too much, and now we were in trouble because we had fallen into excess. And a lot of them weren't very sympathetic to us. And I found that at the time we had a small exhibition of the work of the life and work of W.B. Yeats. And I toured that exhibition around German universities all over the country. And each time I gave a talk about Yeats, but I also insisted on going and meeting the business students, on talking to the economics faculty.
Great.
So in other words, I was using literature, cynically maybe, but I thought genuinely, to open a door so that I could get a message about Ireland through to people who maybe thought about Ireland as an economic disaster. And I wanted to make the point, there's a lot more to Ireland, by the way, than what you read in the papers. And by the way, what you read in the papers is also wrong, and here's the true story. You know? So I've always been able to use literature to get across a wider point about Ireland. So I think it's important, I think, at least, diplomats are storytellers, you know?
Right.
I mean, in the old days, way back, we told the story only to other diplomats. In other words, when I first went to India, my ambassador at the time, I never remember him giving a public speech. Now I speak publicly 10 times a week or more. Right. Because in those days, in the 80s, 70s and 80s, 90s even, diplomacy was conducted behind closed doors. Now it's conducted in the open air. And it's conducted on Twitter and on Facebook and in the media. And I like that, because I like telling Ireland's story. And I think literature is it's only one way, but it is one way in which you can tell the story of Ireland. And I think that applies to other countries as well. But it's particularly the case with Ireland, where our literature has such a big part to play in the life of our country and the history of our country, because, you know, you can't separate the work of William Butler Yeats from the independence struggle which he wrote about, you know. A Terrible Beauty is Born in Easter 1916. So our literature has a kind of a resonance, not just for its own reasons being fine writing, but also because it relates to the history and the evolution of Ireland.
Absolutely. I think I speak on behalf of the audience. We could listen to you read poetry for the rest of the day. Yeah, right?
Every morning on Twitter, I like to start the day with a good tweet. Fire off a good tweet.
I'd rather listen to you read poetry.
I occasionally tweet a little clip of myself reading as well. So
Oh, good. Well, we'll all follow you. I'd like to open it up to audience questions now. Yes. Gentleman over there.
Good morning, Mr. Ambassador, and thank you very much for a very interesting presentation. I'm curious, since all four of my grandparents came from Ireland, how hard, and I know when they simply came without any obstructions. I wonder if you could assess the current situation in terms of how easy, difficult it is for Irish people to become immigrants into the United States now.
Well, it's pretty difficult, obviously, and compared with past flows of people, the number of arrivals now is really quite small. I mean, people still come, obviously, on special visas. There are various special visas that enable people to come here. So I still come across a lot of people who have come here in recent years. So the flow hasn't totally stopped. But we do have a bill that went through, was passed by the House in December and failed by one vote to be approved by the Senate. It's a very straightforward bill, really, and it's been reintroduced in the last few weeks by Congressman Richie Neal, the chairman of the Ways and Means Committee, along with Congressman Jim Sensenbrenner. And that bill simply gives Irish applicants access to what's called an E3 visa, which is currently only available to Australians. And this E3 visa was devised for Australia to reflect the special relationship between Australia and the United States. Well, my argument on this is that if Australia has a special relationship with the United States, and my wife's Australian, so I've nothing against the Australians, well, we have one at least as important as the Australian one. So we're hoping that visa bill will go through the House and the Senate in the coming months, which would give up to 5,000 visas to Irish people. And by the way, those visas will benefit America as well, because it's a reciprocal arrangement which will allow an equal number of Americans to live and work in Ireland for as long as they wish. The other thing, of course, is that visa program will help Irish companies who want to invest in the United States, because they'll be able to send their own staff over for a few years to get the company moving here and then start to hire locally. At the moment, they're having problems in getting their executives into the United States because of restrictions on immigration and controls at the airports and so on. They're having difficulties, which they've complained to me about many, many times. So that bill would actually not just be beneficial for Irish people wanting to come here. And by the way, the numbers now would be quite small, I think, because our economy is doing extremely well. Our unemployment's down to 5%. In fact, we have now become a nation of immigrants. Do you know that currently 1 in every 6 people living in Ireland was not born in Ireland? So 17%, a higher percentage than the United States, was actually born outside of our country. So our country has been transformed in the last 15 years as a result of the impact of immigration, mainly from other European Union countries, Poland, Lithuania, Latvia, Bulgaria, Romania. And so far, at least, Irish people have responded very positively to this demographic change. And we don't have any anti-immigrant movements. We don't have any populist resistance to immigration. Most people in Ireland recognise that immigration has been a positive experience for Ireland, in that it has helped us to grow our economy in ways that we wouldn't have been able to do without the impact of immigration. For example, I visited the Google offices in Dublin a couple of weeks ago. They employ 8,000 people. They have 66 different languages spoken on the Google campus in Dublin. That requires, and they need those people because they're operating on a global basis. And they need people from different language groups to be able to function properly. And we wouldn't be able to do that from our own resources. We could only do that because we can bring people in from all over the European Union who speak a wide range of languages that Google and other companies in Ireland need to have within their workforces in Ireland.
Wow, I had no idea. Those are fascinating statistics.
Yeah.
Another question? Yes.
Hi, good morning. I heard you speak about poetry and so forth. What's your favorite Irish music? And also, I was wondering if you could put a positive word into Leo Moran of the Saw Doctors, that they need to get their act together and come back to Massachusetts.
Well, you know, I'm kind of I'm kind of an age where my favorite Irish music would be someone like Clannad. You know, I really, because they were at the height of their fame when I was sort of, you know, taking interest in music, and I love the way they managed to turn music in the Irish language into a global phenomenon. You know, I mean, and I've since met the band and we're quite friendly with Moya Brennan, so they'd be the Irish band that I would sort of identify most with. I also, by the way, love a newer band called The Gloaming, who are made up of a virtuoso Irish fiddle player, Martin Hayes, and an American pianist. So, and there's an American guitarist and so on. So it's an Irish-American project, and they play a kind of a contemporary version of Irish traditional music, which to my mind is a beautiful example of how our tradition can be made into something that is clearly Irish, but also has a kind of an influence from world music and from jazz in particular. So I'd recommend The Gloaming. If you could catch them at some stage. They have an Irish language singer who sings with them. He has a beautiful voice. But the combination of this virtuoso fiddle player and a virtuoso Irish fiddle player and a virtuoso American jazz pianist is something quite special. The Gloaming.
Wonderful. Thank you for the recommendation.
And as far as the Saw Doctors are concerned, I don't know the Saw Doctors, but if ever I meet him, I'll tell him he's wanted in Massachusetts, right?
Thank you. Yes, right here in the corner.
Hi, good morning. So, right now, due to very ridiculous immigration policy in the United States, it's extremely harder for H-1B visa to get renewed. It's like 5 times higher denial rate than 3 years ago. So some big company, technical company, right now, they try to set up sectors in Canada. So keep people still moving closer to the center, however, avoid such a thing. So I'm just curious, do you think that after Brexit, Ireland will have the chance? Because think about that, another country will pay for the graduate education, then train them for the first round of working visa, then give all the people to you.
Well, I mean, look, it's not for me really to be a judge of US immigration policy. I mean, a lot of Irish people come here. We actually have pre-clearance in Dublin now, where you go to the airport in Dublin. One of the big advantages, by the way, of flying from the US to Ireland is when you come back, you clear US immigration and customs in Dublin, which means that when you arrive in Boston or Chicago or New York or Washington, you walk off the plane as if it's a domestic flight, pick up your luggage and go home. So I'm really not I'm not in a position to make a judgment on U.S. immigration policy. I am being told by people who are familiar with our immigration. You know, we have immigration centres all over the United States which we fund, and I'm told that it's becoming that bit more difficult. However, the administration is supportive of this new visa scheme for Ireland, which will be a very modest affair, and it doesn't really affect, it simply puts Ireland on the same level as Australia, which I think would be perfectly reasonable given the nature of our traditional links with the United States. But I don't really have the hands-on knowledge to be able to to judge other visa schemes. But I do think that it benefits both of our countries if more people move back and forth. And I don't want, by the way, I don't want to see Irish people moving here like they did in the 19th century because they have to leave, because there's no alternative. I want to see Irish people come here for a few years and gain experience and maybe go back. I'd like to see more Americans go to Ireland, gain experience in Ireland and move back. I was recently down at the University of Virginia giving a talk about Thomas Jefferson and the Irish Declaration of Independence 100 years ago, and I met some students there from UVA who had just come back from Ireland, but they didn't go to Ireland to study Irish history or literature. They went there to study data analytics and social media marketing. They went there to look at the experience of Google and Facebook and Amazon operating their European headquarters from Ireland. And that's the kind of relationship that I think is going to be important for the future, because we have so much in common between Ireland and the United States that we need to have more flow back and forth, because the only thing I've learned over the last 40 years of foreign service is that no country and no people has a monopoly on wisdom. The best way we can hope to achieve whatever wisdom is available is by pooling our resources, pooling our ideas, working together. So anything that brings people together is a good thing. Anything that separates people is something I prefer not to have.
Well said.
By the way, I'd like to recognize Congressman Kennedy, who's a great friend of Ireland, and who's just, I just saw him coming in there a little while ago, so it's a real honor to have you here. And you know, Congressman Kennedy's family are the best example, really, of the continued connection that Irish Americans feel with Ireland, because, you know, we're now quite a few generations from the people who left Dunganstown in County Wexford, 14 miles from where I grew up, by the way. So so the Kennedys and the Mulhalls are both southeast of Ireland people. So I share that link with this great Boston Irish family. But it is something to behold that the generation of Congressman Kennedy have an interest in Ireland, which has been passed down the generations from that time in the 1850s when the family left County Wexford.
Wonderful. Sure, this gentleman.
Thank you. Good morning, Ambassador. Pleasure to meet and hear you. I was hesitant to ask the question until you told that marvelous story about the Prime Minister and used the word entertainment. Not everyone in Boston celebrated Cinco de Mayo Sunday. A lot of us remember the passing of Bobby Sands. I'm just wondering what your feelings were on his incarceration, his election, his ultimate sacrifice, and his effect on the peace movement. Thank you.
Well, I mean, I'm someone who believes in peaceful methods. My favorite Irish politician is Daniel O'Connell, who in the 1820s achieved the first great reform of the British Parliament by making it possible for the first time since the Reformation for Catholics to serve in the British Parliament. And that started a tradition of Irish parliamentary activity in the British Parliament that lasted for nearly 100 years. And then we got our independence in 1922. And since that time, we've had an unbroken parliamentary democracy in Ireland. And by the way, most of the countries that became independent after the First World War, as Ireland did, ended up by the 1930s being ravaged by you know, very destructive left-right divisions, which destroyed democracy in many of those countries. And many of them suffer then 40 years of communist rule. So Ireland's achievement in managing to be a democracy, a parliamentary democracy for the last 100 years is something that's, I think, worth celebrating. And that's what we're celebrating this year with the centenary of the Irish Declaration of Independence. I of course accept that. In fact, I'm quite adamant about this. That the Irish struggle for independence in the period between 1916 and 1921 was an expression of Irish national identity, which ultimately secured our independence. So I'm not one who in any way regrets our independence struggle. I think that it was a product of its time, and it was the product of the failure of home rule to be delivered before the First World War broke out in 1914. So I'm not in any way a revisionist who wants to pretend that we should never have had an independence struggle. I think that's probably overdoing the rewriting of history. I never supported the campaign of violence in Northern Ireland. I still take the view that it would have been better had Northern Ireland not endured 30 years of violence, but that happened, and therefore we can't undo that. And the priority now, and it's also, I think it was a tragedy that so many people lost their lives in Northern Ireland in different circumstances, and obviously that includes those who died during the hunger strikes. But I have never been comfortable with any support for violence, and that's why I now say that no matter what happens with Brexit, there's no justification for any return to violence. I believe that we are in a world where we can achieve our ambitions, our goals, our aims through exclusively political and democratic means. And the charm of the Good Friday Agreement is that it shelves recourse to violence, and it insists that the way forward for Ireland is through the legitimate aspiration to have Irish unity by consent. And that's the rock upon which I stand. The Good Friday Agreement is where it's at. The Good Friday Agreement was supported by the vast majority of people on the island of Ireland, north and south, and that agreement still prevails and has to be fully implemented. And it includes a legitimate aspiration towards Irish unity in the future, but achieved by exclusively democratic and political means. That's a very long answer to your question, and I apologize for the length of my answer, but it is necessary, I think, in these situations to explain in a rounded way where I'm coming from.
Certainly. A student in the center has a question.
I'm Ronan. Good morning, Ambassador. But do you think that the majority of immigrants coming into Ireland would be mostly American or from all surrounding European countries?
Well, there are about 8,000 American-born people or American citizens in Ireland. So it's a reasonable number. Now, there are a lot more people who have Irish passports, so are Irish citizens, and therefore, but they would maybe be American-born. So yeah, there are quite a few Americans in Ireland, and the number is increasing, and will increase further as more US companies seek to invest in Ireland in the years ahead. The number one immigrant community in Ireland is Polish. So there are 150,000 Poles living in Ireland. Now that may not sound like a huge number, but if you relate the population of Ireland to the population of the United States, 150,000 for the United States will be something like 10.5 million. So that gives you an impression, an idea of the scale of Polish immigration into Ireland. And the figure for Latvia would be about 50,000. Which again, if you multiply that by that's 3.5 million. There'd be 3.5 million Latvian-born people in the United States if you compared it with the population of the United States. So most of the immigrants into Ireland are from other European countries. So the top 10 immigrant nationalities are Poland, the UK, people from Britain and Northern Ireland, Latvia, Lithuania, Bulgaria, Romania, Germany, Czech Republic, so they're all Europeans with one exception. We have a lot of Brazilians in Ireland who came in for various reasons over the years, and there's a substantial community of them. Plus there are a lot of people from Africa and from the Middle East, but predominantly our immigrant populations come from other European countries. And this is all, by the way, a product of our membership of the European Union, because if you're a member of the European Union, anybody from any one of the 28 countries can live in any other European country totally free, without restriction, and can live and work in those countries. And that's why we have so many people from all over Europe living and working in Ireland, and they've been a great advantage to our economy. They have helped to raise our economy up from where it was 10 years ago when we were in great difficulty to where it is today. And we've had the fastest growing economy in Europe for the last 5 years. I was in Dublin recently in the Google building. It's a high-rise building looking out over Dublin. I could see cranes everywhere. So the future for Ireland looks very, very good indeed economically. The only risk to us is if the global economy were to become more protectionist. That would be a very bad thing for Ireland. And that's why we hope that the current difficulties between the EU and the US in relation to trade, those difficulties will be overcome, and that we will avoid going down the road of tit-for-tat imposition of tariffs. That would be disastrous for Europe, for the United States, and particularly for Ireland.
Well, Ambassador, thank you so much for a conversation that's been as entertaining as it's been informative. Thank you so much. And we'd like to welcome Dr. Grant back up.
Please, I just want to add my voice of thanks for a wonderful conversation this morning. Thank you all for joining us and keeping this discussion alive. Ambassador, thank you for being such a student of history, sharing that experience with us. Thank you for returning to the States where your journey began. In Kansas City, flipping hamburgers. I mean, anything, to the students who are here, anything is possible. I just want to let you know that. But thank you for bringing to life economics and culture and poetry in such an elegant way. The work that you do as ambassador through storytelling clearly makes a transformational difference in the way that we engage with one another. And your leadership on the national stage is deeply appreciated, particularly during these complex times. So I thank you, sir, for being with us this morning and for your service. We deeply appreciate and respect your time and your energy and your expertise. And thank you so much for moderating and your insightful questions. It's wonderful to have you in the room. We hear you on the radio, and it's wonderful to have you with us this morning. So thank you very, very much. I want to thank the team from the Consulate and the Institute for putting together this program. We work in deep partnership, and every member of the Institute team who worked on this, along with their colleagues at the Consulate, I thank you all so much for the partnership and your good work on these efforts this morning. And to Fionnuala, I want to thank you for your service in Boston and New England, and may the road rise up to meet you as you travel to Kenya to represent Ireland as ambassador to Kenya. We congratulate you, we applaud you, we thank you for all that you have done.
I was meant to have a final word, and I was going to use that final word to pay tribute to Fionnuala Quinlan, who's been a fantastic colleague here. She's served Ireland brilliantly during her time in Boston. And she's been a great support to me. I've always enjoyed coming here because the programs that she's organized for me have been superb. I know Boston will miss Fionnuala. This ambassador will miss Fionnuala as well. And I wish her all the very best. And I thank also Aoife Budd for the work she's doing here. And she'll continue to be responsible for looking after me when I come to Boston again. But I think Fionnuala will be a great asset to Kenya and to the Irish relationship with Kenya and the surrounding countries in Africa. Thank you, Fionnuala.
Thank you, Fionnuala. Thank you. And the ambassador mentioned the very deep ties, as I began my remarks too, between Senator Kennedy, the Kennedy family, and Ireland. And Congressman, I want to thank you for being here with us this morning and for your service. And we too had the opportunity here months ago to watch that and talk about that incredible documentary on John Hume and looking at the role that the senator and congressional leaders played in that. In this room, we celebrated with the Irish Consul General the 20th anniversary of the Good Friday Accord, and Senator George Mitchell joined us for that. So those partnerships are deep and special. And I just want to close with a reminder. Ambassador, you said something that just stuck with me among the many things that you said this morning, but that no people, no country, no culture has a monopoly on wisdom. And when you think about that, the times that we're in, the work that we do at the Institute to bridge the divides, to bring people together for civic conversations and knowing one another to make our best progress, those words are timely. And in addition to taking away poetry and economics and the challenges and the struggles and the need to pull together rather than divide, because that's what keeps democracy strong, people strong, country strong, no wisdom, no country, no culture has a monopoly on that wisdom. So I thank you, sir. I wish you good luck on the rest of your travels across the States. Thank you for the important work that you're doing. Thank you all for joining us. If you would like something to do at the end of the day, I invite you all back here because this evening we're having a program on affordable housing issues in Boston and Massachusetts. So please return, follow us. You are welcome here anytime. Thank you. Have a good day.